Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. My name is Doug Paal. I'm Vice President for Studies here, and I'll be taking part in the first part of our afternoon's discussion, which is going to be on nuclear politics on the Korean Peninsula and beyond the title of the paper you've had in front of you on Northeast Asia as well. This is an unusual and welcome joint cooperative project this afternoon between the Korean Economic Institute and the Carnegie Endowment. And we're very grateful that so many of you have come out here today. When you signed up for this, you didn't know whether it was going to be 110 degrees or the beautiful weather you've got now. And it shows a commitment to this subject that goes above and beyond the call of duty. Well, the first order of business for me before we go into our first session, which will be a Q&A session with Park Jin, who has a lot of experience in Korean foreign policy making through the legislative process and is more recently a Woodrow Wilson scholar in his post-legislative days. My first order of business is to introduce the director of the Korean Economic Institute and our good friend and colleague, former Congressman Don Manzullo. Please.
Well, thank you all for coming out on a beautiful day like this. Someone said it's impossible to bring together a group of people in Washington during the summer. And I said summer begins August 1st. So at that time, no one's around, Doug. But Doug, thank you for your kind introduction for co-sponsoring this event with the Korean Economic Institute of America today. With the world's attention focused on other parts of the globe, it's important that we do not neglect the security challenges in Northeast Asia. With the unpredictable nature of the North Korean regime, anything can happen, particularly during the doldrums of the summer months. Iraq invaded Kuwait in August. The Berlin Wall went up in August. The Gulf of Tonkin incident also occurred in August. Plus, today marks the 100th anniversary of the opening salvos of the First World War with the invasion of Serbia by Austria-Hungary on July 28th of 1914. National and economic security go hand in hand. Without a stable and secure environment, economies and peoples cannot flourish. And that's why KEI is involved in these issues, because if stability on the Korean Peninsula is undermined, then not only is South Korea directly affected, but the rest of the world. South Korea is now America's 6th largest trading partner, ahead of Great Britain and France. Just 4 decades ago, North Korea's economy exceeded South Korea. And now we are all familiar with a seminal photograph of the Korean Peninsula at night, bright in the south and dark in the north. That is a result of the leadership of North Korea choosing to put military first ahead of the needs of their own people. And President Obama said it during his 2012 remarks at the University of Yangon in Burma. The leadership of North Korea has a choice: follow the path of Burma and become a responsible member of the international community, or continue to be isolated and shunned. The President said, let go of your nuclear weapons and choose the path of peace and prosperity. If you do, you will find an extended hand from the United States of America. Yet that open hand is continually rebuffed by provocative actions and absurd rhetoric from the North. More economic sanctions are likely in store, particularly if North Korea tests more nuclear weapons and missiles. Last May, the House Foreign Affairs Committee unanimously passed legislation to strengthen sanctions against the DPRK, particularly on financial institutions that do business with North Korea. And despite the gridlock in Congress, this bill could quickly become law if there is another provocative act by North Korea. We also need all regional partners to work together towards a common goal of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. While unique issues affecting different nations that are part of the six-party talks are important, resolving them should be part of an overall strategy in dealing with North Korea. No nation should go it alone. For many years, the focus was on pressuring China to rein in North Korea behavior. Now that China sends more positive signals on urging North Korea to stop undermining stability in the North Korean Peninsula, Russia may now be the new wild card as it ramps up economic cooperation with North Korea. Multilateral economic sanctions are only as strong as its weakest link. How Russia behaves may determine the effectiveness of current and possibly future sanctions and other pressure to halt and reverse the North Korean nuclear weapons program. We're privileged today to have with us three outstanding security experts from Korea who can help shed some light on this complex subject. They are here at KEI's invitation to participate in another event, and I am pleased that they agreed to participate early in order for us to benefit from their expertise. First, Park Jin, former chairman of the Foreign Affairs, Trade and Unification Committee in the Korean National Assembly, and now executive president of the Asia Future Institute, will speak on nuclear challenges in Northeast Asia. Hopefully he's fresh as a daisy as he just arrived on a 14-hour plane flight from, almost said plane flight from Korea earlier today. Next, Kang Choi, Vice President of the prestigious Asanan Institute, and Chung-Min Lee, Korea's Ambassador for National Security Affairs, will discuss regional challenges in addressing the common threat from North Korea. We all look forward to your presentations and the discussion of the most important issue facing Korea, how to denuclearize the peninsula. Doug?
Good. Well, thank you very much, Don, for that introduction. We are privileged to have insights from someone who's thought a lot about the nuclear question on the Korean Peninsula and in the Northeast Asia region today. You just heard his introduction. He's one of those classic examples that Korea has developed an art form about, which is to get someone with a good PhD, get him a professor, get him into government, get him thinking, and then start his own think tank. This is, I remember when I left government, I said I wanted to start my own think tank, and a very wise man said here in Washington, we need more mergers and acquisitions in that area. We got too many think tanks. But I'm very pleased that you've agreed to join us. Now, when there was conversation about how we would, what would we discuss today, you had proposed a title for your remarks of Balance of Power or Balance of Terror. What were the thoughts in your mind when you suggested that?
First of all, I'm very honored to be here. It's my first visit to Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and Paul, thank you for leading the discussion this afternoon, and I'm very glad to see a good friend.
Many friends.
Ambassador Tom Harvard, and especially the leading international scholars from Korea. So I'm still under the jet lag, but if I make misstatement, perhaps my colleagues would clarify me on any issue of discussion, especially James Schuff. Thank you for the invitation. And certainly President Don Manzullo, who is doing a great work for Korea-U.S. partnership. And I see my good friend from United Nations, Ilichev. Nice to see you again. When I proposed the title, the Nuclear Challenge in Northeast Asia, especially on the Korean Peninsula, is it balance of power or balance of terror? This is a kind of symbolic sources of concern that we all have, especially with regard to North Korea's continuing nuclear ambition, which might have a chain reaction in the future if this problem continues in terms of stimulating other countries in the region, including Japan, certainly South Korea, and China too. Even without these nuclear problems, we do have a conventional military balance of power in the region, together with the difficult issue of historical disputes, plus the territorial issue. So I try to look at the situation in the Northeast Asian region, and especially on the Korean Peninsula, from a wider macro perspective. What I can say in the beginning is that certainly the North Korean nuclear challenge still continues to the extent that people are concerned about whether we can actually stop North Korea from the proliferation, and if that's not possible, what else can we do towards the North? And certainly from our viewpoint in Seoul, we need to engage with North Korea through meaningful dialogue and some sort of a meaningful progress in the denuclearization process, which we do not still be able to witness. With regard to China, certainly, which is a growing power in Asia, the rising power and influence in the region, certainly we want China to play a more proactive role in persuading North Korea to renounce its nuclear program and to make a right choice for the future, which is opening and reform and paying more attention to the people's livelihood. And also with regard to Japan, which is very conscious of the rising power and influence of China in the region, we certainly want Japan to contribute to the peace and stability, not only as a member of the Six-Party Talks, but also in terms of the recent Japan-North Korea negotiations on the abductees and also other issues concerned. So looking at Northeast Asia as a whole, I have the feeling that perhaps the conventional notion of the balance of power, especially based on the conventional military balance, is actually changing, is being transformed into something more closer to the nuclear balance of power, or you can say balance of terror. So I try to put two elements into one title.
How are people thinking on the peninsula, especially in the south now? We've had very difficult negotiations, and they haven't been brought to a conclusion yet, of the 1, 2, 3 negotiations. And there's a strong desire on the part of Korea to retain its domestic civilian nuclear power capability and the additional capabilities that may raise concerns that Korea would have a breakout capability for nuclear weapons. At the same time, we're all working on the common objective of trying to end the North Korean proliferation. Mm-hmm. How do you snake your way through the contradictions in those two postures?
Right. In principle, South Korea, the South Korean government certainly tries to revise the existing nuclear cooperation agreement, the so-called 1, 2, 3 agreement, which was signed more than 4 decades ago, when Korea was a very minor country starting with its nuclear program. In 21st century, at this time, Korea is one of the 5 big civilian nuclear powers in the world, and we are also exporting the nuclear power plants to a country like the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East. And that is the result of the continuous efforts on the part of the Korean government and also the Korean nuclear industry to develop its technological capability on the principle of the non-proliferation and to contrast South Korean civilian nuclear capability model from the proliferation model, which is graphically described in the North Korean nuclear ambition. But this continues to be a problem, image problem, and also political problem, and diplomatic problem too. The image problem is that when people talk about nuclear issue related to the Korean Peninsula, obviously you think about the North Korean proliferation first. And we have a very uphill battle vis-a-vis North Korea to solve this problem. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's becoming more and more difficult to stop, not to mention reverse, the North Korean nuclear program and development. So under these circumstances, the South Korean government's desire to revise this nuclear cooperation agreement to allow civilian reprocessing or recycling of the spent nuclear fuel and also to move towards the uranium enrichment for civilian industrial purpose in a very transparent manner is certainly a challenge, not only for South Korea but also to the United States. Because this 123 agreement, the issue of revision, is a very important precedent for the United States in dealing with other countries in the future as well. From our viewpoint, this is a really important issue, very crucial issue for the future development of the Korean nuclear industry, which needs to develop our nuclear technology to the extent that we can fulfill the full cycle of the nuclear technology, but also the growing need to supply nuclear fuel in a much more stable manner, and also the need for the Korean overseas nuclear power plant project. In the case of the UAE, certainly the country needs a stable supply of nuclear fuel as well. So I think that in the long term, this is something inevitable. And in order to create some new mechanism for South Korea to move towards this higher level of upgraded level of nuclear technology within the framework of the transparent to non-proliferation is a very important issue. The negotiation, which was prolonged, which was postponed until 2016, is an ongoing task for both countries, but it also has an implication for other countries as well. So I very much hope that somehow we can find a common interest and a common vision for the future nuclear cooperation between South Korea and the United States.
Thank you. One of the really big challenges facing the Obama administration at a time when they seem to be up to their waistline and alligators around the world is trying to bring to a conclusion the Iranian nuclear negotiations that are now underway. The focus, among many things, is and to give reassurance to concerned parties who don't want Iran to have a bomb and who don't want to have to bomb Iran, that we find a way to have IAEA supervise a low level of capability in reprocessing and in uranium enrichment, or a lower level. One of the concerns that's been nagging at me about this process stems from our experience from 1994 to 2002 to 2005-08 in the North Korean negotiations and six-party talks, where transparency cannot be assumed. Now, we've seen North Korea very much involved with Iran from everything from missiles to nuclear capabilities. What's your assessment of the capacity of Iran to learn from North Korea's ability to hide its secret nuclear programs, or to conduct things that would, should we reach an agreement between now and November, October with Iran bilaterally or multilaterally under the G6, could we be surprised one morning to find out they've had tunnels that they learned how to build from Pyongyang that are full of reprocessing equipment that's given them a breakout capability that the negotiations were intended to deny them?
Well, certainly I think this is a very threatening security concern, not only for the U.S. but also for South Korea as well, to see some sort of a substantial technological cooperation between North Korea in Northeast Asia and Iran in the Middle East with regard to the nuclear programs and also missile programs, and as you said, the underground network. This is a common security threat to both region and also to the global community that we somehow persuade these countries from going into further threatening security posture by the clandestine cooperation on the military technology. From South Korean viewpoint, we really hope that the situation in the Middle East can be stabilized and effectively managed by the U.S. government under President Obama to bring in some sort of a bright future for the Middle East region. We see the conflicts between Israel and Palestine. We see the Iranian nuclear issue continuing, and also the Iraqi situation, which is closely related to the Iranian engagement, and the situation in Syria and Afghanistan and so on. All these conflicts and the security issue from Korean viewpoint means that the U.S. policy towards Asia, so-called the pivot to Asia or rebalancing strategy towards Asia, is really impaired by the escalating tension in the Middle Eastern region. So certainly it is our common interest between U.S. and South Korea to effectively manage the security crisis in the Middle East in connection with North Korea. We take it very seriously that North Korea is not only developing its unconventional asymmetric weapons of mass destruction in their own territory, but also proliferating this dangerous technology, military technology, to other countries, especially in the Middle East, to countries like Iran. This is something that we need to stop and we need to manage so that we can reduce the security threats to the countries and the regions involved. The most important thing for South Korea in dealing with the North is obviously inter-Korean dialogue. President Park Jin has proposed many times that we need to build a trust between the two divided Koreas. And in order to build trust, we need to talk about what we can do about the future relationship between the two sides. The nuclear issue and the economic cooperation issue, and also perhaps the unification issue as well, if North Korea makes a meaningful progress on the denuclearization process, but still has not transpired. So this is a kind of growing concern from our viewpoint.
Just before coming down for this meeting, I saw the latest statement out of Pyongyang threatening the United States with nuclear destruction of the White House, the Capitol. It's listing them all as another sweetheart and declaration of intentions from North Korea on this subject. 13 months ago, President Obama invited Chinese President Xi Jinping to the Sunnylands estate in California. And at the end of that, sort of the high point of that outcome at the time was this talk of a new type of great power relationship between the two countries. And the measure of it at the time was China appeared to put the denuclearization priority ahead of the stability on the Korean Peninsula priority. And that seemed to last for about 2 weeks. And then they went back to the old mix, or stability first, denuclearization second. More recently, a couple months ago, President Park invited Xi Jinping for a very meaningful state visit to Seoul. And I say very meaningful because I think it's pretty well understood that the North Korean leadership would like to go to Beijing and have the succession to Kim Jong-un blessed by the Chinese Pope of communism so that they could claim legitimacy. And yet they've been bypassed. Seoul was approached first. Symbolically in the Asian culture, that's a pretty important gesture.
Yes.
Beyond that, do you think your government's approach to China, this much warmer relationship than we've seen before, is that a path to getting to the solution to denuclearization in your view?
Well, certainly Korea-China relationship has been growing very rapidly in recent years in terms of the economic cooperation through trade and investment, in the people-to-people exchange, and also recently a strategic dialogue with regard to North Korea to persuade them to give up nuclear ambition. No substantial results have come from this continuous bilateral dialogue, strategic dialogue with regard to North Korea, but we think that somehow this is what we need to do now, given the recalcitrance of the North Korean regime on the nuclear issue. China certainly has to play its role in pressurizing the North to move away from this dangerous course of action. In Sunnyland's summit between President Barack Obama and President Xi Jinping, I remember the 2 points that the two leaders have made a statement on the North. And one is that both United States and China would not recognize North Korea as a nuclear state, even though how many times North Korea is that they are a nuclear state, and despite the fact that they put it in their own preamble of the Constitution that North Korea is a nuclear state, the two countries would not recognize the argument. And the second is that the two countries will certainly oppose the nuclearization, nuclear development of North Korea. So I think there is a basic consensus and agreement between the US and China on how to deal with the North Korea issue. Although we do not have any concrete action program to pursue this basic principle towards North Korea. The United States still maintaining strategic patience. China is still maintaining status quo. So in that sense, I don't see any basic strategic shift in China's policy towards North Korea, especially on the nuclear issue. As you mentioned, Doc, the order of the priorities of Chinese policy towards the Korean Peninsula seems to have been changed for some time. Originally it was a maintenance of peace and stability and the denuclearization and the solution of the problem through dialogue. I think that despite this kind of tactical shift in the order of the priorities, basically the stance remained the same. In the summit meeting between President Park Jin and President Xi Jinping, the expression of the joint statement on North Korean nuclear problem has been changed a little bit. If I understand correctly, the statement came out with the expression that the two countries would firmly oppose the development of nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula. I understand that the Korean government, the South Korean government, originally tried to persuade China that we need to put the expression of the denuclearization of North Korea in the joint statement, which Chinese side didn't accept. And instead, they came out with a kind of compromise, with a kind of stronger expression of the opposition to the nuclear proliferation of North Korea. So this stance, this line of policy posture still remain. Now, there are two schools of thought in South Korea about the possible role of China with regard to North Korea. Maybe I think in Washington too. The one is that, well, China is certainly an important player in this nuclear game, and we need to push China further to play a more proactive role in persuading North Korea to renounce the nuclear ambition. And two is that China may not be that proactive in the first place. They still want to maintain the strategic buffer in the north of the Korean Peninsula, and they're still providing energy and food to North Korea to sustain the regime, despite its troublemaking and a dangerous statement, and even the anti-Chinese foreign policy statement from Pyongyang. Beijing still maintains its basic relationship with North Korea for strategic reasons. So the best approach that we can try from South Korean viewpoint is to continue to stress to China that their active role playing concerning the nuclear issue is very important. It's in the interest not only for South Korea, but also for China as well. Recently, I met a Chinese scholar who visited Seoul and gave a speech, as a public speech. And this scholar is from Tsinghua University. And I was very encouraged by the fact that one of the leading Chinese scholars have publicly made a statement in Korea in a seminar that he perceives North Korea as an uncertain, troublesome, and dangerous regime. And he says that North Korean regime cannot sustain itself if it continues to pursue this parallel track strategy of developing nuclear weapons on the one hand and try to promote the people's livelihood on the other. Simply, it cannot work. You cannot catch two rabbits with such a military force policy. And then he said that if North Korea chooses to reform itself, then the North Korean economy will be integrated with the South Korean economy. On the other hand, if North Korea doesn't want to choose change, then economically it'll collapse. So either way, Korea will be united, and this is in the interest of China. So I was very encouraged, and I asked him, how many scholars in China think like you? And he said, maybe I'm not a majority in China, but certainly we talk about this freely, and there's a growing sense of urgency in China about the North Korean problem. So despite the fact that strategic basic posture has not changed, I see this growing sense of kind of a new perspective towards the North Korean issue, especially the North Korean nuclear issue, because of the prolonged difficulty of solving this problem.
I could ask you questions all afternoon, but I want to open the floor. I want to call on a couple of questioners, but first, and then ask you, when you're identified, please to say who you are, what institution you represent, and to make a brief question. Show of hands. Okay, there's one here in row second, and then back here about row 7.
Wait for Mike.
Yes, Mike is coming. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Mike Billington. I work with Lyndon LaRouche in the Executive Intelligence Review. You've said a lot about China, but you haven't mentioned the extraordinary dialogue and development going on with Russia and North Korea and South Korea. You just sent a very powerful delegation to Rason for the opening of the port that the Russians have built there. And according to the Russian Minister for the Far East, North Korea has agreed to Park Jin-he's effort to get the railroad and the pipelines going, to connect the Eurasian land bridge all the way to Busan, and to give North Korea a stake in peace, not just threatening them to shut down, but to give them an economic stake. That's what I want you to address. Thank you.
And then back here, a little farther.
I'm Willie from U.S. Navy. If unification takes place today, what should unified Korea do with all those nuclear weapons produced by North Korea? First, expand them, or maintain them, or get rid of them. I think, what course unified Korea is supposed to take?
Thank you. Would you have to take those two questions out?
Okay, yeah. The first question on Russia, which is a very important question actually. During the recent years, Russia has certainly tried to make inroads into the Asia-Pacific Ocean through North Korea, especially Rajin-Sundong area, as very important strategic location, and also the midpoint between the ocean and the continents. And from Russian viewpoint, this is an ideal location for the Russian economic flow to grow. So certainly there is a common interest between North Korea and Russia about developing this area to make it a kind of a center of the economic transactions in Northeast Asia. I understand that Mongolia is also interested in working closely with Russia in cooperation to develop this area. And I think this is a very good development, and this is also a good channel of opening up towards outside. And after the execution of Chang Song-taek, the number 2 powerful man in North Korea, certainly the relationship between North Korea and China in terms of trade, business, and practical, pragmatic economic cooperation have been contained to a certain extent, and this creates a good opportunity for Russia to promote their activities in the region. The important projects that are now being discussed, as you rightly pointed out, are the railway transportation and also the natural gas project from Russia through North Korea to South Korea, which was discussed during the previous government as well, under President Lee Myung-bak and President Medvedev before President Putin came back, and Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un. And there was some sort of agreement on this trilateral energy cooperation project between Russia and 2 Koreas. So I hope that it can happen, given the energy need for South Korea and also the Russian business opportunities and North Korea's benefit of allowing this natural gas to flow from Russia to South Korea. Of course, there are political risks involved in pursuing this project, with the possibility that North Korea may one day, switch up the gas pipeline, depending on their mood and depending on their choice. So we need some sort of a government-to-government level official trilateral agreement on this project, so that we can minimize political risks involved. The 2 is the transportation, as you know, the Trans-Korean Railway and also Trans-Siberian Railway. If they are combined, then you can ride a train in Busan and goes all the way to Vladivostok and all the way to Siberia and to Moscow and St. Petersburg. And that's exactly President Park Geun-hye's proposal of Eurasia Initiative, that because of the blockage of North Korea between South Korea and Russia, our economic potential cannot be realized because of the national division. And in order to remove this obstacle, we need to first connect ourselves on the railroad with the Siberian landmass, which is a great program. And I wish we can accomplish this strategic project with cooperation from North Korea and Russia as well. As you know, Russia has recently relieved the debt burden of North Korea. I think they have just exempted about 90% of the North Korean debts vis-a-vis Russia. And now the trade between Russia and North Korea can be paid in Russian ruble, not in dollars. So certainly Russia-North Korea relationship is getting closer, and we watch it very carefully. What kind of new pragmatic economic cooperation will come out of this. So this is a very important project. I wish that it can make some good results. Thank you for the questions, by the way. And about nuclear weapons, presumably, some sort of a nuclear capability in North Korea. I have no evidence that North Korea has actually manufactured the nuclear bombs in their own country, but certainly the conventional wisdom is that they have the plutonium extracted to be able to make about 6 to 8 nuclear bombs, or maybe less than 10 nuclear bombs. If Korea is unified today, for example, like the Berlin Wall in Germany, which I don't think is going to happen in the Korean Peninsula, by all common sense, the important thing is to contain the weapons of mass destruction so that it cannot proliferate or be transferred to other country or other groups, and certainly not the terrorist group outside North Korea. So that's the top priority, is to how to contain the weapons of mass destruction in the north. And second, if there's any progress in the stabilization of the contingency in North Korea, then certainly we need to dismantle these weapons of mass destruction, maybe with the cooperation with the United States or the members of the United Nations under IAEA safeguard regulations to remove the main source of security concern, which is weapons of mass destruction. So we need an international joint efforts to contain and effectively manage and dismantle these WMDs in North Korea.
Thank you. We're going to be stepping into the time of our next panel, so if we could take one or two quick questions, and this will be the conclusion, please.
Xiaoyang Shah, correspondent of Wonhui Daily. As we know, the six-party talks has broken down for 5 years, and during this period of time, the North Korean have made continuous progress in its nuclear program. So do you think that the mechanism is still alive? And if so, is there an urgency to resume the talks? And recently, Chinese Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Zhang Yu and former ambassador to the United States Zhang Yu called on the United States to lower somewhat the threshold for the talks. So what's your perspective on this issue? Maybe Doug can also give some response. Thank you.
And if there are no other questions, we'll take that one and conclude.
Okay. All right. Shall I?
Please.
Okay. Six-party talks is the only international mechanism, the established international mechanism to solve the nuclear issue of North Korea. In that sense, the six-party process has contributed to highlighting the importance of the solving nuclear issue of North Korea, and also to try to create some kind of a international collaboration to persuade the North. But unfortunately, it has lost its momentum. I mean, the first responsibility comes from North Korea, of course. They try to play for time and to continue with their nuclear proliferation and build their nuclear arsenal. So obviously, other countries look towards China. That China is a chairing country for six-party talks. Is most enthusiastic about the utility of the six-party talks as a mechanism to solve this problem. I think that China is certainly feeling anxiety and even anger towards North Korea that the country is not complying to any demands or any request by other members towards meaningful progress of nuclear denuclearization. I look at the positions of the members of the six-party talks, and I realized that this is a very difficult combination of countries in the first place, despite the common concern about the security threat from North Korea. The countries have different ideas. I mean, in Chinese aphorism, you call it different dreams in the same bed. In Korean, it's 동상 이몽. Why do you call it? Is that from our viewpoint, the South Korean viewpoint, the most important relationship in the six-party talks is inter-Korean relationship. So it's 2 + 4. From our viewpoint, it's 2 is 2 Koreas and 4 is other 4 countries involved. Whereas from North Korean viewpoint, they also have a 2 + 4 perspective, but the first 2 is North Korea and the United States, not South Korea. I mean, North Korea is not really interested in talking with the South about talking about the nuclear issue. And Chinese perspective, if I'm wrong, please correct me, is very similar to North Korean position, that the most important relationship within the six-party framework is North Korea-United States relationship. So it's again 2 + 4. So unless we resolve this issue of divergent perspective among the members of the six-party talks, then it will be difficult for six-party talks to make any meaningful progress. Having said that, we cannot find any better alternative multilateral mechanism to deal with North Korea nuclear issue. So I very much hope that this mechanism can be resumed, revived, resuscitated to continue with our efforts on multilateral cooperation to denuclearize North Korea. So it's not dead, but it has lost its momentum. So we need to resuscitate this process.
And just since you asked for my thoughts on this, I wholeheartedly agree with what's just been said. I would note that the six-party talks have reached a high point in 2005 and perhaps 2008, but since then, repeated efforts by the Obama administration from the very beginning of its first year in office have been met by rebuffs and rebuffs from the North, and really it's no longer credible to go through that set of doors at the outset. However, the discussions that were mentioned earlier by Assemblyman Park about inter-Korean dialogue is always better than no dialogue. I have great confidence in the Park Geun-hye government that they can handle this responsibly and would not get themselves in positions that would be in any way detrimental to our ultimate objective. And therefore I think that they should be encouraged to try to pursue the dialogue. Not that we think the door will be open to an easy resolution of any of these issues with North Korea, but that if the party that should lead on this at this point should be Seoul, they're the best position to judge how to go forward and see if we ultimately make our way back to something resembling the six-party talks. That concludes this first session of our program, and I want to thank you, Park Jin, for your contributions and careful presentation of your thoughts on these very sensitive issues. We're going to take a couple-minute break here as we transition the people up on the panel, and please stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.